Hey, deserving listeners. So it is Monday, and I thought I would answer some emails from patrons. I haven't been able to do this in a while, and I'm looking forward to doing this. Also, I'm dedicating myself to going as quickly as possible. I feel like I've been yammering too much lately, and there's a lot of emails that I want to get to. This first email is from patron Jimbo. He asks, what supervision model did you follow as a supervisor and why? What supervision model did I follow? Well, I wrote a book on supervision, and the first or second chapter, probably second chapter, I review the different models of supervision that are sprinkled throughout history and why those models emerged and whatnot. But the very short answer that I'll say is the model that I follow is my own, which is what I call multi-role clinical supervision. And it entails 19 distinct roles that are categorized into 4 umbrella categories. 19 is a very bothersome number. I really tried to come up with a 20th, but that seemed like shoehorning in things. But those roles, and there's a type of supervision model that involves identifying roles that was pretty influential on me. But the 4 umbrella role categories that I have are relationship roles, public safeguarding roles, skill building roles, and guiding roles. So relationship roles are attachment between the supervisee and the supervisor, empathy, this kind of listening. Public safeguarding involves gatekeeping and monitoring. Skill building involves teaching and guiding. And then there's guiding roles, which involves like mentoring and being there to help them in their career, that kind of stuff. So if you want to read about all that, you can check out my book, Multi-Role Clinical Supervision. Next email. All right, this next email, patron Sarah, she wrote in and said, I'm a 26-year-old woman who has recently been diagnosed with polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. Tachycardia? I imagine it's not tachycardia, but anyway. Polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, or PVT, a life-threatening heart condition. Well, Sarah, I'm sorry about that. It sounds scary. I've had 3 episodes in the past few months where I nearly died. Wow. It's incredibly scary, but I'm having a defibrillator implanted soon, which will give me some peace of mind. I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to talk to other people about having a life-threatening but not terminal condition. I'm tempted to reach out to an old friend that I've fallen out of contact with to tell her that I've always appreciated our friendship, but I don't want to make people uncomfortable. On a side note, your podcast has been a great companion to me during this time, and becoming a patron was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Everyone should become a patron. Thank you for your time and advice. End of email. Well, patron Sarah, it's nice of you to say, but I'm really sorry that this happened. I don't know if this was what my clients were suffering from, but I've had clients who had the defibrillator installed? Is that the term? Implanted, and it was scary, but it was literally a lifesaver. And again, I don't know if I'm saying that I have experience working with people who have had a heart condition that was genetic on some level, and they had episodes where they almost died, and so they had a defibrillator installed, and they would talk about how at any moment something horrible could happen and they could just keel over, but the odds of that are pretty low. It's terrifying. So, and it changes your life in a lot of ways, right? And you're in the throes of that right now. But your question is, if I have any advice on how to talk to other people about having a life-threatening but not terminal condition, and you want to reach out to an old friend. These are almost 2 different kind of questions. The second question is, you want to reach out to an old friend that you've fallen out of contact with. I'm guessing because the life-threatening events have reoriented your priorities or caused you to think about what really matters in life, and part of that means reaching out to that old friend, and that is notable that you've had that motivation. And I don't know what to do with that, but and as a therapist, I don't have any opinion or advice, but as a citizen, I would say that I'm the kind of person that reaches out. I just did this. I just reached out to someone that was a big part of my life in the past, and we didn't have a falling out, but we just drifted apart. And without going into the details, it was awkward and weird for me to reach out, especially in the way that I did, because so I had a dream about them, and then that prompted me to, say, hey, let's meet up and catch up or something. And I emailed that person yesterday, kind of spontaneously, and I got to that point where I was like, okay, do I click send or do I not? And I'm the sort of person that's just like, fuck it, you only live once, and if it's bothersome to someone or it puts someone out, then I guess that's what happens. But I'm not pressuring them. I'm not forcing them. They can not respond. They haven't responded, but I'm guessing that they will. I sort of hope that they will, but if they don't, I probably won't notice for a few weeks, and then at that point I'll be like, wait, I thought I emailed them. Oh yeah, I did. They never got back to me, or something. I don't know, but I don't know. You only live once, and I think that reaching out in that way is really important. Jessamy reached out to me. We listened to her. She was interviewed on the podcast. We talked about this explicitly. She's that kind of person. I'm that kind of, not everyone is that kind of person, but I feel like everyone wants to be that kind of person, but refrains because they get bogged down in their routine or worried or something about being awkward or something. And I don't know. I learned a long time ago that if you want to abide by your fears of awkwardness, then you will live a life of isolation and boredom. For me, the vast majority of my social activities, my friends, the cultivated relationships that I've built, even within my family, are because I came to the Y in the road of awkwardness and decided, fuck it, I'll be awkward, I guess. And I know that I'm much better for it. And it's, anyway, so the other question that you're asking, though, is how do you tell people that you have this life-threatening but terminal condition? Well, I don't know what you're worried about specifically. Are you worried that it's going to worry people or it's going to cause stigma to happen? I don't know. But I feel like, generally speaking, when it comes to stuff like this, you just blurt it out. And if it's weird or awkward to them, you'll navigate through that together. And if they're put off by the fact that you have a life-threatening condition and they don't care enough to give you some grace, then fuck them, honestly. For reasons that might be clear, I am in a fuck it mood lately about things like this. If people are going to be put off by your humanity, then really just fuck them. Okay. Okay. All right. Next email. Anonymous patron from New York. He says, "Hi, Dr. Kirk. I am 19 and I have been diagnosed with being on the dependent personality spectrum." All right. Just chiming in here, just to remind everyone what dependent personality is that the individual, due to overprotectiveness and possible abuse from parents, the child develops a schema of incompetence, that they cannot do things on their own, and they have to have an overfunctioner in their life to do everything for them. And the dependent individual will actually be incompetent because they were never given a chance to develop competence, and they don't allow themselves to build competence. So they actually, as an adult, are incompetent, but not inherently so. They can learn, and they're not nearly as incompetent as they and their overprotective, overfunctioner would believe. Okay. They all, so overfunctioners are the same as a codependent person, depending on the circumstance. So listen to basically the difference between a codependent person and an overfunctioner is the codependent person is definitely an overfunctioner, but the overfunctioner isn't necessarily a codependent person. The codependent person in my language system is someone who suffers from codependent personality disorder, whereas anyone can be pushed into a role of an overfunctioner, if that makes any sense. Okay. Overfunctioners might be codependent, which means that they need to overfunction, but some overfunctioners are just overfunctioning because of the emotional field. Okay. Going on with the email. I have also grown up with epilepsy that frightens people and gives me a lack of independence. I think I'm drawn to my partner because he is similar to my mother in overprotectiveness. Just chime in here. Yeah, this all makes sense. I don't know, anonymous patron from New York, but dependent personality and codependence and overfunctioning and underfunctioning can be triggered or exacerbated by something like epilepsy. When you were growing up, your mom had rational and logical and understandable reasons, loving reasons to worry about you. And that might have been all that it took, or she came from a history where that was her role, was to be overprotective and codependent and assume that it's her job to take care of other people, and that's the only way she gets worth. And so you could see how those things could feed off of each other. And you had a logical, rational reason to believe that you can't necessarily do what other kids can do. But in all likelihood, it went way too far. If you have dependent personality, then it went too far. Certainly, there are a lot of people with epilepsy and other conditions of childhood where they don't develop dependent personality. There's an effect there on their sense of safety in the world and their independence maybe, but it sounds like those things fed off each other. So just going on, and you're saying that your current partner is like that too, an overfunctioner or a codependent. Going on. And I have been feeling a strong, irrepressible urge to cheat on my partner. Why do you think I want to cheat? End of email. Well, anonymous patron from New York, you are talking about something that I talk about a lot when it comes to passive-aggressive personality. It's not in the DSM anymore, but it is very related to dependent personality. There's a Venn diagram there. Some might say it's just a subset, or they're the same thing, or just different ways of talking about it. Sort of like how borderline and histrionic can be very, very similar, but if you get into the weeds, they are different. Anyway, so if you want to listen to my deep dive on passive-aggressive personality disorder, I, from my memory, go into detail about a profile of an individual who has dependent/passive-aggressive personality disorder who has an irrepressible urge to cheat. It's a very common dependent passive aggression because when dependent and passive-aggressive individuals were being raised, they, in all likelihood, had scenarios in which they had natural anger, as children do, advocating for themselves. You know, when we think about angry kids, we think about defiant kids or kids being grumpy or kids being dicks or something. But there's a lot of functional anger that actually occurs to children. Anger is a very functional emotion, and for kids, they will feel anger when their rights are being infringed upon, when they are wanting something and they feel like they deserve it. Maybe they are being bratty, but how do we react to them when they are being bratty, right? Do we shut it down so that they suppress their anger, or do we listen, or do we help them process it, or do we empathize? And so when we suppress it, when we get angry at them, when we abuse it out of them, then the child learns neurologically to not even notice their own anger, and therefore they don't notice when their needs are being infringed upon, but their needs are still being infringed upon. In fact, their rights are being infringed upon way more than the average person because they don't even advocate for themselves. So they have an inordinate amount of injustice that they have experienced, that they felt they have experienced, and they have an inordinate amount of rage and anger about it, but they have zero awareness of it. Now, given that you're saying, anonymous patron, that you're on the spectrum of dependent personality, that leads me to believe that your clinician thinks that you have you're somewhere down the spectrum, but you don't have a full-blown case of it. It's just my guess. So there's a chance that you do feel some of your needs and your anger. But at the very least, there's a pretty good chance, and of course talk with your therapist about this, that your irrepressible urge to cheat is a manifestation of your passive aggression due to your suppression of your anger and rage. And your anger and rage, 90% of it might not even be towards your partner, but towards your mother or towards the doctors or your epilepsy or yourself or something. And that unexpressed anger has to go somewhere. Another term for passive aggression is hidden hostility, or hostility that sneaks out through a way that is not aware to even you. You have, in all likelihood, anonymous patron, tremendous anger and rage and hostility that even you don't notice and you suppress. Now, your partner is probably not accustomed to your anger being expressed, so you probably have outside forces as well. You chose your partner for a reason. This is why therapy and couple therapy might help as well. But your hostility and your anger has to go somewhere. You have to set the record straight. The balance has to be made, and cheating is a very effective way of doing that. It is a way to express anger, a lot of anger all at once, and you're doing it in a hidden way. And it's a safe way to you because you, in all likelihood, believe that you can get away with it, right? You can have your cake and eat it too. You can both get back at your partner and the world and people in general and all this overprotectiveness. And you can also get away with it because if you hide it well enough, and dependent people and passive-aggressive people are typically very good liars because they've had to lie to people their whole life about what they're angry. Because the passive aggression began when they were young. They would sneak food out of the pantry, or they would hide their father's shoes, or they would steal money from their mom's pocketbook, or they would sneak out at night and smoke a doobie with the bad kids across town and then come home before their parents woke up and act like they are the model student. Or they will have interesting pornography tastes and masturbation tastes or something, and they hold this. And it has a triple purpose of shaming the self, because the individual doing all these sneaky things, they internally will punish themselves and say that they're a bad person and they are clearly incompetent. So it upholds this notion, this cheating and this sneaking around and this hidden manner of getting back at people it hits all the bases, but it's extremely self-destructive, and it is not a way to express anger. It doesn't do anything other than just degrade you and hurt others and demean yourself, and it doesn't move the ball forward. It makes it worse. It can make you even more dependent and more passive aggressive, right? So the answer is to keep you talk about being diagnosed, so I'm guessing that you're in therapy. Also, you're 19. You've caught it early. Of the dependent passive-aggressive individuals on this planet, the percentage that knew that they had this issue when they were 19, I would say would be 0.00001% of people. Literally, I'm not even exaggerating. So you're way above the curve here, and you'll be fine. And you got a lot of time ahead of you. You have a lot of years left of being dependent and being incompetent. When I was 19, I was incompetent in a lot of ways. I was dependent still on my parents in a lot of ways, and that's okay. It sucks when you're 45 and you're this way, but let me know how things go, and connect with your anger. That's the key. What do you feel? Who are you? When are your rights being trod upon? How do you feel about things? And also your own schemas and defenses to your own anger. You know, because it's not just a matter of connecting with your anger, it's a matter of pushing aside the very robust internal barriers to your anger, all the excuses. Like, oh, well, anger doesn't get you anywhere, or, oh, well, you know, it's all my fault anyway. I shouldn't feel anger at other people, or I don't know what I feel, and can't we all just get along? And, you know, there's various different defenses that will get in the way. So, you know, let me know how that goes. And let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. Let's do an OPP. These middle tier patrons became patrons in the beginning of 2022. We have Lauren from Leamington, Ontario. We have Cornac, I think, from the Netherlands. We have Anne-Marie from San Francisco. We have Chelsea from Farmington, Connecticut. Emily from Bellingham, Washington, good old Bellingham. Isabel from Tucson, Arizona. Mick from Los Angeles. Miranda from Kelso, Washington. Pizza is Life from Brooklyn, New York. How appropriate is that? Shane from Seattle. We have Justin from God knows where, Leanne, and also Sarah Ann from God knows where. Thank you so much for becoming a patron all the way back in the beginning of 2022 and staying a patron and also being a middle tier patron, because that means you're like a double patron. All right. So patron Yabba Dabba Doo, he says, he emailed in and said, "Hey, Kirk and Bob and Rebecca and Berto and Stacy." I like that. Hi, Kirk and Bob and Rebecca and Berto and Stacy. You should probably include Alina in there as well, but you maybe don't know that Alina works with others. Anyway, with the rise of TikTok, Twitter, and other social media sites, there's an increase of lay people getting famous for psychological facts or psychology hacks or hacking into the human brain. As someone who works with adolescents, I hear teenagers talking about diagnosing themselves all the time. I had a patient argue with me about the definition of trauma bonding. Yeah. With all this information online, how does it affect the counseling process when you have teens and adults coming into therapy trying to tell you information you know is inaccurate? Is it better to be ignorant of the facts or altogether? Is it better to be ignorant of the facts altogether or to be misinformed? Maybe this question goes beyond the scope of counseling and applies to all situations. Love what you do. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much, patron Yabba Dabba Doo. Well, I don't know, but what I'll say is what I have said before when I get asked similar questions, which is, on one hand, this is good because there was a time when people didn't know anything about psychology or very little, and they thought it was just for crazy people, quote unquote, and they weren't ever going to go to therapy. Now you have mainstream people going to therapy, right? Which is bizarre to me, and I applaud all the work that we did in our field to raise awareness and lower stigma. People have been working on this for decades, and we did it. The side effect is that we've now unleashed our language system and our thinking and our words and concepts to the masses, i.e. TikTok. And it's as anything else, you're going to find misinformation. You're going to find motivated charlatans. You're going to find reasons to exploit, and you're going to find reactionary people, and then there's going to create an echo chamber of the misinformed leading the misinformed. And that sucks, but that's the case with any concept throughout history. We don't live particularly in a unique time. There's always been misinformation. There's always been people that have believed in ridiculous things. I mean, the belief that the earth is only 6,000 years old goes back a long time and existed well before the internet and continues to exist. And if the internet dies, it would exist after that point. There's just a lot of reasons to believe certain things, and it's impossible to get people off of those ways of thinking, even though Wikipedia exists. So there's that. And for me, it's not just teens and young people. I'll have students who are in their 40s who I have to deprogram. I have to spend weeks deprogramming them from the misinformation that they've been buying into online, particularly around narcissism, by the way. And then I can teach them. And so my graduate courses are, I'm starting backwards. I'm starting negative. I have to spend time deprogramming before I can even begin the curriculum of the course. It's fucking ridiculous. And it's expected, though. And it's upsetting, And I don't think I could have predicted this, that you would have, just take the concept of narcissism, for example, that it's a concept that's been talked about in my field for over 100 years, maybe longer, in various different ways. But in the ways that we're talking about in terms of narcissistic personality disorder, we've been talking about it in our field, since the early 20th century. And it's been pretty consistent. And then we unleash it to the masses, and it starts to get talked about among 99.999% of the individuals, and the discourse online is being conducted by non-clinicians about a clinical topic, and they never or rarely stop and ask a clinician if what they're saying makes any sense. And so they're all just echo chambering with each other. Meanwhile, you have clinicians that are trying to sell a book or get followers who buy into that bullshit. There are highly prominent psychologists, licensed psychologists and professors who are online, on YouTube, on TikTok, that are completely bastardizing the term of narcissistic personality disorder or narcissist. And I'm watching them sell their soul for followers or something, or accolade, or they're just stupid. I don't know. But that doesn't help, right? If the public has the wrong idea of what a narcissist is, and you have clinicians and respectable professors online buying into the bullshit because they're trying to get more followers, then we're truly lost on the concept. But does it really matter? I don't know. I don't know if it really matters. It bugs the fuck out of me, though. I'll tell you that. And I get the impulse as a clinician to try to buy into the discourse, or maybe shift your opinion a little bit to get more followers or something. But I don't know. I just don't know how some people sleep at night. Anyway, next question. So full disclosure, it's Tuesday, November 5th right now as I'm recording this. So just take that into account here. Patron Ash from Ireland, she writes in and says, "Hi, Kurt." Well, first off, I don't know if you can so then you say, "I'm a big fan of the show." And if you're a big fan of the show and you're a patron, my name ain't Kurt, unless you're emailing someone named Kurt. Patron Ash, I'm fine with it. I respond to Kurt. I respond to Keith. I respond to Craig. I don't care. My name is just a set of letters. It's not a big deal, but it's just ironic that at the height of my anger, you email me and say, "Hi, Kurt, I'm a big fan of the show." But God bless. We're good. We're good. Well, how about I just bastardize your name somehow? I'll call you Ashy, or how do you bastardize Ash? I'm trying to guess how people would mess up your name, Ash, like Allie, Amy, or Ashley. I don't know. Anyway. Hi, Kurt. I'm a big fan of the show and have found it really helpful for honing my clinical skills over the years. I just learned about the term gray rocking from an adult client who uses this technique when she cannot avoid interactions with her mother, who has significant narcissistic traits. After looking into it, it sounds a lot like the techniques I teach kids to deal with bullies. With your experience working in a family setting with individuals with personality disorders, I would love to hear your opinion about the gray rock technique. Thanks for your time, Ash from Ireland. Well, maybe the Kurt is payback for all the times that I've mispronounced names like Sorsha and Donald, like Donald Gleason and other names like that. Anyway, so yeah, I've talked about gray rock before. I think I might have made a whole episode about it, but the idea is sound in that when you're dealing with someone, and it doesn't have to be someone with personality disorder, but it's someone who is, let's just say at the very least, mildly abusive, if not moderate to severe. And it can be a former partner, like an abusive spouse, or it could be a friend that is overall just bad in your life, or it could be a mother who is trying to enmesh and is overall harmful, or it could be a boss, or it could be a lot of different sort of people. But the idea is that at a certain point, you decide that if you could snap your fingers, you would not have a relationship with this person. And you've done a lot to try to slowly back away socially from this person, but they always find a way to get back in. And they will do it in a variety of ways. And maybe it's your own fault to some extent. It's not your fault that they're leading you into. And in the more extreme cases, we have stalkers, and you were saying like with bullies, right? So someone at school that is targeting you. And maybe I'll talk about it with that because that's like the simplest case. So you have a kid who comes to you as a therapist and says, I'm being bullied, what do I do? And you might determine that at least part of the approach, aside from empathy and that kind of stuff, is to help the kid to gray rock the bully. Well, one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but one of the major factors for a lot of bullies is that they bully kids because they get a reaction. And if you don't have a reaction, or you have minimal reaction, or you have the sort of reaction that isn't really what they're looking for, then they'll just naturally turn their crosshairs to someone else. And strategizing about how you can manage that. Now, sometimes it's not possible because the bully doesn't really care, but it can work with people. If someone is stalking you and you have done a lot of measures to try to get the stalker to stop doing this, well, one of the techniques that might work, it doesn't always work, but it's a good strategy to try, is to gray rock, which means that as they try to provoke you, even if they're trying to scare you or something, you don't respond directly to them. And stalking is kind of complicated, but just let it be. But more commonly, gray rock is being used like with this mother. So you have a mother, you say narcissistic traits. At the very least, the mother is self-centered and hurtful, and maybe there are moments with the adult client where they get along with their mother, but it's not overall worth it. And for the client, if they could snap their fingers, they would just be like, yeah, I'd rather just not deal with it. And my mom, she has a way of like getting under my skin and making me feel guilty, and she triangulates other people, and I just don't know what to do. And when she guilt trips me, it throws me into this panic. And then I text her back and I say, Mom, like, come on. Or I say, okay, we'll hang out. Or, Mom, you always do this. Well, the problem is that you're trying to deal with an irrational person in a rational way. Bullies and narcissistic moms and stalkers, these are not rational individuals, and you're not going to be able to rationally deal with them and negotiate with them any sort of boundary. So the strategy is, if you are not a stimulus to them and you don't give them what they want, then you are of no use to them anymore. And if you gray rock, which means the overall strategy is that you are that of a gray rock, you are boring, then they will just naturally turn to someone else. And it's unconscious often to the invasive individual. They're not usually consciously strategizing to provoke you to be stimulating to them, even if it's negative. Like any attention is good attention, right? So for some of these people, they're just trying to get any attention. And if it's negative attention, then that's what it is. Well, we can think of some politicians that are this way. It's like if we just stop reacting the way that we do, then maybe they'll just kind of go away. Like there are viable strategies. And I've been talking about that for a long time. I'm not blaming us, but anyway. So the strategy with, so you're saying with personality disorders, again, every personality disorder is different. You got paranoid, you got schizoid. I think what you're talking about is either narcissism or maybe borderline, because borderline people can often do this as well, can become really focused and target and strategize and provoke unconsciously to themselves. It's out of desperation. But if you just become an uninteresting object to them, then it won't feel good for them to obsess on you and provoke you. And the shitty thing is they will turn their sights on someone else and begin the process somewhere else. But, that's not your problem. And I've done this before. I have gray rocked people before and known that someone else will come along and get in their crosshairs, and they will be way worse off than me because in all likelihood, they're not a clinician that understands personality disorders, and it'll suck, but I have no power over that. And it's not my responsibility to sacrifice my entire life because someone else was traumatized when they were a child. All right, let's take a break. More emails. All right, back from the break. Let's do another OPP. I often forget to do OPPs when I'm doing episodes with other people, so I just want to capitalize on the fact that I am organized enough to do this right now. All right, so these mug level is what I'm calling them. These patrons are at the mug level, getting the mug. They became patrons at the beginning of 2022, and they are all from God knows where, which is interesting, which makes me wonder if we even sent these people a mug because we need to have their address in order to send them a mug. And Stacy will email folks and say, so I saw that you signed up at the mug level, but you didn't include your address visible to us, and therefore we can't send you a mug. So, but maybe they emailed the address to Stacy. Anyway, but all these people from God knows where. We have Emily, we have W, we have Becky, we have Caitlin, who I believe I have interacted with, through the mail, meaning that she has sent stuff. Anyway, we have Cheryl, and we have Contour 99. And then we also have 2 annual highest tier. These are very special people. Not that y'all aren't special, but these are very special people. We have Nikki from Calgary, Alberta, and Jamie from Philly. So thank you so much for being at such a high level for such a long time. All right, let's go to this email. Is from patron Kathy from California. They say, hello, Dr. Kirk. I was wondering if you and Bob or Rebecca could share some perspective on this. Just chiming in here. I would have saved this for one of them, but let's forge ahead. I got into an argument with a friend who was a licensed therapist. My friend blurted out that I have borderline personality disorder and that we can't be friends anymore. Okay, that's interesting. So you have a friend who is a therapist, and she says, we can't be friends anymore, and you have borderline. Yeah, not good going on. First of all, I did not consent to treatment. Just chiming in. Yeah, I think what you're saying is that you didn't consent to be treated by your friend, and therefore diagnosis is not appropriate. Secondly, this diagnosis was ruled out by my therapist. Okay. I have autism, which is an official diagnosis, not a TikTok diagnosis. Thirdly, I wonder about the ethics and safety of a licensed therapist informally diagnosing a person who is not their client. Thank you for reading my question. Well, so your question is you wonder about the ethics and safety. Yeah, it raises a question for sure. And that is particular, but I'm not surprised. And if you wanted to report this, you could to the state licensing board. I doubt they would do anything with it because you're not a client is the thing. You're not a client, and she wasn't treating you like a client. And it's not one of the slam dunk indications of an ethical violation that's worthy of sanctions by the state licensing board to get into an argument with someone in your personal life and informally diagnose them. Because that's the thing, like, everyone understands, including you, that this is not a formal diagnosis. No assessment occurred. There's no possible way that she's objective, and it's understood by everybody that it's not official. It's not based on any clinical data. So it's a mistake by a clinician in their personal life. But it says something, and a licensing board might be interested in taking it up. There would be a record of it. I don't know if I would advise doing this to make a report, but that would be the course of action, right? It's not like you're going to find all her clients and alert them to her danger or something, which I definitely wouldn't recommend. But also, you don't know who her clients are. So the only thing you can do is go to lights. I mean, I guess you could tweet about it and call her out, which you're free to do. I don't recommend it, but that's my answer to that. All right, this next email is from annual patron Megan from Arizona. She asks, you talk a lot about giving an apology, but what are the steps to receiving and accepting an apology? End of email. I like this, really short email. So I go into detail about this in my apology deep dive. One could argue that the apology deep dive should be called the apology and forgiveness deep dive, because there's a whole a segment or chapter or something that's just dedicated to forgiveness, because there's a lot to get into there. And of course, to evaluate the effectiveness of an apology, one must assess and understand forgiveness, right? Because that is one metric for measuring the effectiveness of an apology, is whether or not someone forgives you. So, but it's not the only metric, and it's not the only reason to apologize, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but I could look at my deep dive notes and see if I already came up with some steps, but I don't feel like it right now. So I'll just kind of riff, which is to say that from my memory, I might not have all the details of my deep dive, but apologizing. So you say, what are the steps to receiving and accepting an apology? So there's receiving, which could be one thing. There's accepting, which is another thing. And there's forgiveness, which is another thing. So receiving, you could argue, is at the baseline level of just like, okay, I've received, like someone emails you an apology and then you just send a receipt back saying confirmed, received email or something. Maybe a bump up for that is accepting, like, okay, I accept your apology, but I don't forgive you. That apology is, I think in my deep dive I was saying that accepting an apology basically means that you acknowledge that it happened and that you are okay with the manner in which the apology was provided or something. Forgiveness is a whole other thing and can happen independent of an apology. You can forgive someone without ever being apologized to. You can forgive someone who apologizes poorly. You can not forgive someone who apologizes perfectly. Forgiving someone is kind of like the grief process, depending on what the transgression was. But, if it's a biggie, like being cheated on or something, then even if you accept your partner's, you receive and accept your partner's apology, and you say, okay, I'm ready to move forward. And in terms of my definition of forgiveness, which involves essentially the letting go, the natural decision to let go of the negative feelings towards someone because of the transgression, right? So you're not forgetting, and you still might have some feelings, but it's a choice. And it's a real nuanced gray area between like, okay, what's not forgiving versus what is forgiving, So in terms of the steps, though, every step of the way, you have to ask yourself, do I want to? Because you don't have to. You don't have to receive, you don't have to accept, and you don't have to forgive, contrary to what a lot of people will say otherwise, particularly out of Christians, right? You don't have to forgive. You don't have to accept. You don't have to. If someone transgresses upon you and you want to hate them for the rest of your life, that is completely your right. And nobody, and I'm telling you, nobody can tell you otherwise. And fuck them for trying to tell you that you have to move on from a transgression that really harmed you, particularly telling you to move on when it benefits them that you move on. Like, hey, women, forgive us for what we've done to you. Or, hey, black and brown people, let's move forward. Why are you holding on to the past? Like, fuck you, pal. We're going to hold on to it because we have no choice because you won't let us forget it. Ugh. So anyway, every step of the way, you have to ask yourself, do I want to? Do I want to hear this? Do I care enough? Do I feel okay with it? Do I consent to communicating with this person? Do I want to accept it? How does this feel to me? Does it feel sufficient? Are they actually apologizing for what I want them to apologize for? Do I feel safe? All the things. Do I want to go down a road of letting go of these feelings? Do I want to begin the process of changing my feelings about this transgression from producing a lot of acute pain and agony and anger to a place of something that just happened in my history that if I thought about might make me feel a little bit of feeling, but not this sort of acute feeling I'm feeling it right now? Do I want to? Do I care to? How long will it take? So that's me rambling about that. Next email. All right, this next email is apropos of what we were talking about earlier in terms of codependence. Anonymous patron, she writes in and says, "Hi, Dr. Honda. I am such a huge fan of the podcast and the YouTube channel, and I have really appreciated hearing you talk about codependence recently in reacting to Jackie and Marshall on Love is Blind, even after listening to your deep dive on the subject before." Just chiming in here, does this mean that your email, anonymous patron, was sent during the Seattle season of Love is Blind, which was 2 years ago or something, and I'm just now getting to this email? That's possible. Somehow I don't think so, because every year I purge all of the docs, and but who knows? Anyway, maybe you are meaning recently, as in the past 2 years, or you just got around to watching those reaction videos. Anyway, as you discuss codependence, I appreciate your emphasis on how the issue lies in a fixed dynamic. I'm curious if you could talk about this overfunctioning, underfunctioning dynamic where the underfunctioner is more invested in maintaining the dynamic and overtly campaigns to dismiss the overfunctioner's needs. All right, just chiming in here. Yeah, I think what you're getting at, anonymous patron, is that you gleaned from my discussions on codependent personality and overfunctioning, underfunctioning, that it's the codependent that drives the dynamic and not the underfunctioner. I hope that that's not the implication or even what I said, but I'm a systems thinker, and therefore when it comes to these kinds of dynamics, typically each is contributing in some way. It might not have equal power from both sides, but you can have underfunctioners that absolutely are more in control or more driving the dynamic than the overfunctioner. Because by the way you're saying this, it's like where the underfunctioner is more invested in maintaining the dynamic. Each person is very invested in maintaining the dynamic because of their traumas. The underfunctioner believes that they need the overfunctioner and are terrified if the overfunctioner isn't there to save them. And the overfunctioner is terrified of having to face themselves, face a life where they're not taking care of someone else, because they believe it's their eternal fault if the underfunctioner experiences any negative consequence to their life. But going on here, I thought for a while that I might be suffering from codependent personality, and I do still think that I may have at one time. I had all the childhood markers of being rewarded for being the easy child, and I was parentified, etc. At the age of 21, I entered into a long-term relationship with a recovering addict who was a bit older than me. By the way, I don't know if you can hear my wife raking the leaves outside. I just wanted to alert people in case they're like, what is that sound? but she's using the rake on the brick, and so it's. But I'm guessing it's not being picked up by this microphone because it's a closer microphone dynamic. Anyway, let's see. I entered into a long-term relationship with a recovering addict who was a bit older than me. As I became aware of this concept of codependence, I sought your deep dive, but something just wasn't quite clicking in the deep dive. Once I got into my mid-20s, I became much more in touch with my needs and became much more vocal in seeking support from my partner. I also began putting my foot down more and more about him seeking professional help and not relying on me as a sort of therapist, especially because I'm not qualified. Just chiming in here. Yeah, from the sound of it, your description is accurate in that you have a streak of codependence that manifested more in the past, but as you learned, the relative low intensity of your codependence allowed you to see through the woods and find your way to where you eventually landed, which is to see it more rationally and healthily that you're not the one to fix this person's problems, even though they are desperately trying to force you to be that way. Yeah, the tyranny can happen from both directions or from either direction. It's I guess easier to point to the codependent person, the overfunctioner, the controller, the overprotective person, the person with more power as the tyrant, as the person driving the dynamic. But each case is different. But typically, both people are desperate to keep it going, and the underfunctioner can absolutely be the tyrant. Absolutely, the underfunctioner can be the tyrant. And from the outside, it doesn't look that way, and we tend to have a bias of sympathy for underfunctioners, particularly if the dynamic looks controlling or overprotective or coddling or something to the underfunctioner. But underfunctioners, as I was saying with the earlier email, if you have a dependent personality individual, or a passive-aggressive individual, and they partner up with someone that has no codependent tendencies, the partner that has no codependent tendencies will over time develop overfunctioning attitudes, behaviors, and emotions. They will become like a codependent. And this is that situation where they're not actually suffering from codependent personality, but they are being pushed into overfunctioning, and they will identify with those feelings without the awareness about it. If they don't watch it, they will over time become entrenched in overfunctioning. They will assume that they're responsible. They will overprotect. They will assume the underfunctioner can do nothing for themselves. And the dynamic will continue, but it was driven by the underfunctioner's dependency and the underfunctioner's trauma. And that can happen. The difference is that the overfunctioner will at times notice, I'm not in the right place. This doesn't feel right to me. Whereas if they have codependent personality, they won't feel that way. The codependent individual won't have those, typically they won't have those emerging notions of like, wait, why am I always the one? Why do and they won't get bent out of shape about it. They'll think about it a little bit more differentiatedly, because the codependent person can get really they can get bent out of shape for having to always pick up after the underfunctioner, but they won't actually do anything to change it. They will just fold in to the overfunctioning, underfunctioning. It'll just be another reason why the codependent person will be clamping down on the underfunctioner or assuming the underfunctioner is incapable. Anyway, I could go down that rabbit, but going on. But unfortunately, as gentle and as reasonable as I tried to be, my former partner was extremely unwilling to rise to my needs, and I eventually realized that I had taken for granted that I eventually realized what I had taken for granted as a normal relationship was actually quite abusive. Yeah, I'm curious about what you have to say about that kind of dynamic. I'm happy to say that I'm in a loving relationship where it's a corrective experience. I'm glad to hear that. I wholeheartedly mean it when I say that that this is in no small part thanks to you and your content, though I promise I don't use your videos as a replacement for therapy. And I also do have a therapist. And then there's a bunch of characters that don't make any sense. And then in parentheses, they write, that was my cat chiming in, walking over my keyboard. End of email. Yeah. Tell your cat hi. And I think I answered your question as I was going through. All right, another email. All right, this next email is from middle tier patron Natalie from Toronto. She says, hi, I have been wondering lately about the psychological impacts of being idolized and told you're a superstar as you grow up. I'm a huge hockey fan. Well, you're from Toronto, so what are you going to do? And the most recent first overall draft pick for the NHL has been touted as the next generational superstar for the last several years. He's 17 years old, and the entire hockey world will be disappointed if he's anything less than phenomenal. How does this kind of pressure shape your psychology and self-image? Thank you so much. Love the show, and it's helped me to be a better person. Well, that's great to hear about that, Natalie, middle tier patron Natalie from Toronto. It's complicated, case by case, and there's not a lot of research on this because it's hard to research, but in my passive observation of various different child stars, whether it's Justin Bieber or Michael Jackson or LeBron James, or I'm trying to think of other, Stevie Wonder. I'm sure there's a lot of others. Miley Cyrus, the Olsen twins, what you talking about, Willis guy, that it's complicated. And the woman who wrote the book, I'm Glad My Mother Died, Jeanette McCurdy, there's so much variation in experience, and there's so many different measures in place to protect children, and there's pros and there's cons. And generally speaking, I wish that this stuff was illegal, that you couldn't do this to younger people, because we don't need to. This 17-year-old, the world doesn't depend on this 17-year-old playing hockey when he's 17, in the NHL. We don't need that. What we need is sane political policy and to reduce climate change, to reduce carbon emissions. We need vaccines. We need to give food to people that are starving. We need to do a lot of things. We don't need this 17-year-old to play in the NHL when he's 17. I mean, I don't know if maybe he'll play in the NHL when he's 18 because he's drafted at 17, but we don't need it. So I wish that there were laws. It's similar to like family vloggers. We don't need family vloggers. We don't need children to be on TikTok. We don't need kids and their parents to be talking about their emotions on Instagram. We don't need it. And the risk, whatever it is too high. Even if it's low, even if the risk is relatively low, which I'm guessing it's not, the benefits don't outweigh the risks. So we don't need it. And somehow we just, look the other way. And as a non-hockey fan myself, I mean, I don't hate hockey. I like hockey. I'll watch hockey. But as a person from the outside, when I hear about this, I'm like, what? But, if this was in the NFL, I don't know. I mean, I guess the analogy to the NFL is that in college football, there is absolutely recruiting. If you're Alabama or you're Florida State or you're one of the biggies, Clemson or something, then you absolutely are recruiting. Even 14-year-olds are being contacted. I mean, I don't know the specifics, but at the very least 17-year-olds are. And in high school, there are kids, American football phenoms that are being touted as the next Tom Brady or something. And so it happens. But anyway, and somehow when you're in the world of fandom, it all kind of makes sense or something. But when you are outside, you're like, what? So it's not good. And as I talked about a lot in the episodes where I was reviewing the laws. What deep dive was this? It was the deep dive. What deep dive was this? I can't remember. Was it the Jody area? I don't know. It was, anyway, I remember doing was it the Jody Hildebrandt and the Ruby Frank? Anyway, there was it must have been. Anyway, there's a whole deep dive bit that I did about the laws of children in entertainment, going back to the beginning of Hollywood and how that movie, with Charlie Chaplin and the kid, I think the movie's literally called The Kid, and how that kid made a lot of money from a hit movie when he was young, and his parents took all the money, and so we passed this law when he was an adult, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so we do not have enough measures in place to protect people. In Hollywood, we do. I don't know if we have enough, but we have a lot. But in other sectors, like in the NHL or on YouTube, there's literally nothing. There's no protections, which is absurd. And that it would take this long for any sort of legislation to occur is ridiculous. And we're just going to wait for people to die, and people already have died, and then someone sues someone, and then there's a court precedent or something. Everyone understands that, and I don't understand why our fucking politicians can't pass laws to protect the human race, with climate change and with this sort of thing, and with protections on civil rights about women and about black people and brown people and immigrants. I just don't fucking understand why our country is just the way that it is, and that politicians are so fucking afraid to actually stick their neck out and do what is right. I'm generalizing. I mean, there are plenty of politicians that are, but just fuck that entire fucking thing. Anyway, so where was I? Oh yeah, fuck the world, right? Fuck it. Fuck the hockey. Fuck the NHL. Fuck the NFL. Can I tell you? So, I was asked today to do an episode about the election reaction, and I was going to, and I had left the house to get my flu vaccine. I did get my COVID vaccine because I got COVID this past summer, and I want to wait to get my COVID vaccine until a little later. But on the way home, I was thinking about what I would say in the episode, and I kept gravitating towards me just saying a bunch of swear words, literally, like a free association of swear words and elements of the world that I want to go to hell. And it felt good to do it in my mind, but when I asked Stacy if I should do it, she's very she never tells me what to do, but she's a good sounding board because she doesn't immediately react with yes or no. She's just huh. And I could tell that she wasn't a fan of that. And so a little bit of that just sort of stuck out. Anyway, okay, children, what could happen to their self-image? Well, the short answer that I should have just led with is that if a child has good parents, good enough parents, and good enough attachments, 0 to 5, and maybe 0 to 10, then they have the foundation, not only personality-wise, but as a family, to navigate the twists and turns involved in fame in general, and also just fame as a young person. I don't know off the top of my head, but I remember hearing stories of famous, really famous child actors who had a good, loving system around them that protected them from Twitter and all these other things. They didn't have a Twitter account. They didn't let them have a Twitter account. They went to school still and had normal friends and did normal friend things and were allowed the freedom to do that, and weren't worked too much. They weren't in stuff year round, and they were supervised when they were the presence of producers, because like you'll have predators who are producers or other folks, and the parents made sure that they were always there to make sure that the kids were never harmed. And the any producer who had a bad reputation of any kind, the child was not allowed to be a part of their productions, and those kids seemingly developed fine. So it's not the fame, really. It's the foundation of attachment and protections and the balance and the well-roundedness that the child has, right? Whereas you take another kid where they don't have secure attachments at home, the parents are seemingly to the child exploiting, and maybe are, the parent is exploiting the kid for their own monetary gain or fame desires or self-esteem needs, and the child is being objectified and thrown around, and the kid doesn't know who they are. They don't even know their feelings, and they're trying to abide, they're trying to give, and they enjoy a lot of it, but there's a thread of being dismissed and not loved and not protected. And they grow up and they write a book called "I'm Glad My Mother has Died," and I've had to go through a lot of therapy and I've recovered, and I still have trauma around this, and I'm never going to be in show business again. That's what Jeanette McCurdy did. So it's and then you hear about all the things that happen to kids, and we could argue that Michael Jackson was a part of that. I mean, his dad, from the accounts that I've read from people in the family themselves, that Michael Jackson's father was one of the most abusive people on the planet. I mean, not just abusive, like, the kind of average abuse that you would imagine. No, the father was like, he would torture the kids, particularly Michael, because it was identified early that Michael was going to be the star. And when I'm a fan of the Jackson 5, but, God bless Tito and Jermaine and the rest, but Michael is way beyond the other brothers in the Jackson 5. And Michael's the youngest. He's a better singer. He's a better performer. He's a better dancer. He's better looking. He's got it all. And his brothers are great, Jermaine, they can all sing, but they're not even in the same universe as Michael from the time that Michael was 6 years old. It's just incredible what Michael was. And anyway, so that did a number on Michael's psychology. You can bet that. and it wasn't just because of the fame. It was because of the fame and what was happening at home, right? And what was happening at home was in part due to fame. So, but if Michael and his brothers weren't talented in that way, would the father have been abusive? Yeah, the father would he have been as abusive? I don't know. Maybe he would have been more abusive because he wouldn't have been a success in life. Would he have targeted Michael as much? Probably not, my guess. So it all works together. Anyway, I'm trying to purge y'all. What day did I say? It's Wednesday. It's November 6th today. Did I say earlier it's November 5th? Either way, you know what's going on. All right. That's it for that episode. I'm literally wearing the shirt, "Take care of yourself because you deserve it." So take care of yourself because you deserve it. We do. Everyone does. Even the goddamn Republicans, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.